All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started here. My name's Cody. Today I'm working on a 2001 KX65. What we're going to be doing is stripping down the bike to get the motor pulled. It's ready for a top and bottom end rebuild, so we went ahead and bought the kit for that. First off, we're going to tear off all of the plastics. First things first is to take off all of what would typically be the 8mm bolts holding on these plastic pieces. You can see here on mine, some of them are going to be 8mm bolts, other ones are random Phillips head because it's an older bike that's kind of been pieced together. Most of the time though, it's going to be these 8mm bolts all the way around. Both sides typically look the same. When we get back here to taking off the fender, we're going to have a bolt there with another side to it in there, which is a little hard to see, but there's a bolt that holds it on back there as well, so we're going to need to have two wrenches there. Other side looks the same as I said. This side mainly has the regular bolts, with the exception of down there. That should be an 8mm as well. Front fender here underneath has 4 bolts, all 8mm. That'll pop off. And for this guy, there's an 8mm down in there. In this case, it's cracked, so it should just pull right off. And then you just pull that out there. We'll see you after we get all these plastics torn off. All right, we have this side taken apart, took off the rear panel and the front panel. Fairly straightforward there. We're now going to go ahead and move over to the other side. Take off this front panel and this rear panel. All right, now that I got all the side panels taken apart on this side, as well as on this side, we're going to go ahead and get to the rear fender now. To do the rear fender, something to keep in mind. We have an 8mm bolt in there that is backed by a 10mm bolt on this bike. So we need to have an open-end wrench on this side and a socket on this side. Same goes here, 10mm, and around the corner we have an 8mm. After that, we're going to take off the 2 8mm down here, and we should be able to lift this rear fender right off. At that point, I'll go ahead and be right back with you. Okay, we have all the side panels removed on both sides here, and we've also now, per the last instruction, pulled off the rear fender. At this point, very simply, you can grab the part of the seat here and slide that right off. Next, we will go ahead, come around, and we'll disconnect the front fender. To disconnect the front fender, it's very simple. You look underneath and you'll see 4 8mm nuts or bolts, and we go ahead, loosen those, take them off, and we'll be able to drop down the front fender. We'll see you when that's done. As you can see, the front fender has been removed. We are going to move to the number plate now. So to get to the front number plate, all you're going to do is go in here, get to the 8mm bolt, and then we're going to go around the side here. And on mine, there's a zip tie holding that on. We'll then be able to go down here, take off that little retainer there, just pop it out, and remove the front number plate. The front number plate's been removed. We're going to move to the step here of removing the fuel tank. To remove the fuel tank, first things first, make sure your petcock is set to off. After you make sure that, you'll want to note where the bolts are. We have an 8mm bolt holding it down there in the front, a retaining strap here holding it down in the back, and you'll need to disconnect the fuel line coming off the bottom of the petcock from the carburetor. Once you disconnect all of those parts, those three parts, you'll be able to lift the fuel tank right off. I'll see you when we're done with that. All right, All of the plastic parts have now mainly been disassembled. We took off both of the side panels on each side. We've removed the rear fender, the front fender, and the number plate. Next, what we're going to do here is go ahead and remove the exhaust system. We're going to go down here, disconnect those two springs. I just grab them with a pair of needle nose and pull them down. That'll allow it to slide out from the front of the motor there. Then you'll move over here, pull out these two bolts. I believe one is a 10 and one is an 8. You'll move back to the mount here, use an 8mm and pull that off. If you do want to take the retainer off or the mount off, you'll use 2mm or two 8mm bolts. Then there's a joint here where it comes together. To get it to come out of there, you'll want to take off the back part of the pipe here, 2 8mm bolts, and then you should be able to pull it right off. All right, now that the muffler's off and the exhaust pipe, let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. We freed up a bunch of space here. We're getting to where we can have some good access to the motor. Muffler's off as well. What we're going to do now is come around. We're going to start working on removing the radiator. This bike specifically only has one side of radiator. So to take that off, it's fairly simple. We have a hose from the top of the radiator to the head, and then a hose from the bottom of the radiator that winds down around the frame here to the water pump side over here, connects to the bottom of the water pump, and then we have one from the top of the water pump to the head. That does not specifically need to be removed currently until we get to the rebuild. First thing we're going to do is go to the side here. We're going to drain the radiator, so make sure you have a catch pan, but you'll take off the hose clamp and then drop that line off there and drain the radiator. I remove the filler cap when I do that to allow it to drain quicker. After we remove that hose, we will go ahead and remove the hose that goes from the top of the radiator to the head. And then these two bolts here. Once you have your radiators off, it's going to look like this. It really opens things up. I also took the shroud off over there. Next step we'll go ahead and do here is disconnecting the carburetor. Step number 1 in disconnecting the carburetor would be to take off your throttle cable. You do that by twisting this guy and pulling straight out. You're then going to want to go ahead and loosen the two clamps here. You have a Phillips head there. That connects it to the reeds. And then this side here, that connects it to your airbox. Once you go ahead and disconnect those two clamps, pull off the throttle, pull out the throttle slide assembly, you'll be able to hopefully very carefully twist, pull, and strain a little bit and pull the carburetor off. This was probably the easiest carburetor pull that I've ever done. That airbox pushed right out of the way when I did that, and this slid right off. So you should have an easy time there. Keep in mind there could be some extra fuel left in the bowl, so don't go tipping it upside down or anything of that nature. The next thing we're going to do here is drain the oil. You'll go underneath the bike, find the 14mm drain plug, go ahead and pull that out, drain all the oil. You could have, most people probably would have done this before even starting working on pulling the motor, but I saved the messy jobs for last. While that oil continues to drain, we're going to start removing some hardware for the motor pull. We need to remove the back brake. To do that, we need to take the pin out back here as a cotter pin, and then we can slide this out. There's going to be Allen head there. Then we'll pull the spring off the retainer back here, be able to lift the rear brake off. All right, oil's drained, rear brake removed. Now we're going to start disconnecting a few more things from the motor. We're going to go over here. We're going to pull off that clutch cable. You can see we have to release it there from the retainer. And then we got to loosen these two bolts so we can slide it out of there. That'll disconnect that. We need to go ahead and disconnect the spark plug wire. We then need to come around here, go ahead and unplug that connector right there. That wire wraps around here, goes down to the stator. Another side note, after you've disconnected the clutch cable from down here, and then you've taken off the spark plug wire, disconnected that, and taken off that plug, you feed it through here. You're going to need to take the two 8mm off of here to disconnect that to pull all those wires out. Once you removed that from its mount, you'll also need to remove the motor's kill switch here by using a Phillips head screwdriver. You should then be able to pull all of the bike's wiring off. Alright, now that we removed the clutch cable from the clutch and from the side of the clutch side of the motor, pulled off the electrical box here and unplugged the connector from the front, as well as the kill switch. We moved and then pulled off the spark plug wire. We moved everything over here, hanging off the stator side of the motor. That'll be removed as part of the rebuild process. Next, we're going to come over here. We're going to remove the chain off the bike. There's going to be a master clip somewhere on here. You can see a connector right here. You pop that off sideways, then you'll be able to disconnect the chain from the bike. Alright, we're about ready to lift this motor out of the frame here. To do that, we're going to have to remove the motor mounts now. There is, right there, a 12. Down there, under the gear shifter, a 12. Right here we have a 14, which is part of the swing arm bolt. On the other side, straight across, we have a 12. Down here, we have a 12. And over here, we have a 19. We're going to pull off those three, and then we'll be able to lift this motor right out of this frame here. It is heavy, so be careful with your fingers. It could help to have a person here to help you. Once you have the bolts off, you'll see that there are the screws coming in from the other side. I usually just take a screwdriver, put it on the end there, and a rubber mallet and tap that out. And then down here on the shifter, same thing. Screwdriver, tap that out. It really helps to have someone else to support the motor while you do this to keep it from falling. And this big boy here, same story. We took the bolt to the other side. We'll need to tap that out of the swing arm. Goes all the way through. And you'll need something there to support the swing arm because that's going to want to drop down. Alright, as you see now, once we pulled out those bolts out of each of these slots, and then back here, the swing arm slot, I have the rear swing arm held by my bike jack there, we were able to have the motor free, lift it out. After some finagling, we have that here. So we have the complete motor here. Over time, what I'm going to do now is go ahead and clean up this KX65. Again, this is a 2001 KX65. I'm going to scrub this frame and everything over here down so it's nice and clean. I'll scrub this motor down, and then we'll get working on tearing down the top end, tearing everything out of the stator side, the clutch side, and all of that in order to split the cases and do a full top and bottom end rebuild. I'll go ahead and show you the Wiseco piston and bottom end set here shortly. Stick around.